Flawless victory.
Okay, here's my next original idea. Imagine this came out on the Jaguar, right? Warlords 3D. Warlords is one of my favorite old video games from the 80s, just in general, and I consider it the precursor to Super Smash Bros., quite honestly, because it's 4 people versing each other, and it's so innovative, it's so fun, and all the old-timers have played it back in the day, right? But imagine if they released like a 3D version of Warlords on the Jaguar, right? That would be my idea. You know, it could have had 3D graphics, but still the same gameplay, and it could have reintroduced Warlords to like 90s kids who never even got to play the original 80s one, you know, on the 2600 or whatever. And also, aside from the Warlords 3D game, this could have included the other 2 versions of Warlords. This could have included on cartridge the 2600 version, if you felt like playing it, reminiscing about it, and it also could have included the arcade version as well, the one that has slightly better graphics. Why not? I think it's possible you can fit this 3D one and the other 2 versions on one cart. That would be pretty amazing, at least for Atari fans. Also, and this is a pretty bold idea, but imagine if this came in like a fatter box, and it included 2 rotary controllers. That's the thing that you twist, that you play like Pong and Breakout, you know, on those old Atari games. The paddle controller, or rotary, however you want to call it, the paddle controller or the rotary controller. And imagine if it included 2 inside the box, where it had a custom paddle joystick circle, so that you can play Warlords with your friends. And Atari could have released rotary controllers, the rotary controller as a separate item if you wanted to buy it in the store shelves. And they could have released it for a cheaper price to get people to think about buying 2 other controllers for your buddies to play Warlords 3D. Again, you know, the Jag, the prices should have been a little bit better, and for certain games I'm listing here, they all didn't need to be $60. Maybe some of them could have been $30 to make people feel like it's worth the investment of playing them, and Atari would have succeeded. It's all about, you know, money and all that kind of stuff. You know, quite honestly, looking back, I think the failure of the Jaguar was only because of 2 reasons, and 2 reasons alone. The first reason was because they didn't fix the bugs in the Jaguar's hardware, so it made it hard to program games for. All you needed to do is take 2 months to fix it. And then the Jags even still could have been released in late 1993. So that was stupid. So that's the first mistake, and that made the Jaguar not look like it was 64-bit when in fact it was, at least for the most part as a game system, in my opinion. So that's the first mistake that was the failure of the Jaguar. People list a million reasons, but honestly, I think it's just 2 reasons, and 2 reasons alone. So imagine they fixed that, right? Then we would have gotten all these other amazing 3D titles on the Jaguar, and it would have been way less 2D ones, and not 2D ports that you could find on the Super Nintendo or the Genesis, right? They could have been more 3D titles. All they needed to do is fix the bugs. 1 or 2 months, done. Also, the other mistake they made was they had manufacturing issues where a lot of people really actually wanted to buy the Atari Jaguar, but it wasn't in most stores because they had a issue with releasing the system and they didn't have a good manufacturing deal going on. So there wasn't Jaguars to be released, there wasn't more being produced. And that was their fault as a company. So they should have fixed that. And if they fixed that, way more Jaguars would have been in all the stores and they would have sold more. So those 2 things, if they fixed just those 2 things, quite honestly, the Jaguar could have sold way more and it could have lasted long enough to be a console in 1995 And then the Jaguar 2 could have came out in 96, where they still could have lasted a bit longer and would have been more successful too, and would have had better games. And again, if they had these ideas I'm coming up with, then they would have been even more successful in 1994, right? Or anyway, moving on. Okay, imagine this. Ultimate Mortal Kombat 3 for the Atari Jaguar. So this was actually supposed to come out for the Atari Jaguar. It was canceled. What a damn disgrace. What a frickin' shame. Mortal Kombat 3, or Ultimate Mortal Kombat 3, was released on the Super Nintendo and the Sega Genesis. And also, I think the Sega Saturn. But imagine this if it wasn't canceled. This is what my custom cover I made would have looked like, and I think it would have been amazing looking. This is a much cooler cover than the covers they had for the Genesis and Super Nintendo. And also, you actually could have gotten people to think this version on the Jaguar is superior if they marketed it differently, if they said that this is the Arcade Perfect Edition, a Jaguar exclusive that I put at the top there. And technically they're right. They could have made a pretty perfect arcade conversion to the Jaguar if they worked pretty hard on it. They could have made it look as close to the arcade as possible. This is a 64-bit Jaguar, or if, debatable 32-bit. And it would have actually looked a lot better looking than the versions of the Super Nintendo and the Sega Genesis. So this could have been an incentive to get people to buy the Mortal Kombat version 3 on the Jaguar. So imagine that idea. Plus, I add all this cool blood splatters on here, and yeah, it's too bad. Would have been cool, though. I wish it was released. Unbelievable. Okay, imagine if they released Atari Anniversary Edition for the Atari Jaguar. This is an old school game. If you grew up in the late 90s, you already know this game. It was released on the Sega Dreamcast and the PS1. And it was like a collection, an old Atari compilation, basically. It was cool, It could have been better, could have had more games. But I always loved that cover from my childhood. I always remember seeing that in the store. But anyway, I do find it probably unlikely that they even would have released this on the Jaguar, the Anniversary Edition game, because at the time they were all about new 3D, new machines and dragons, and it was, especially in the mid-90s, it wasn't about reliving the 2D old Atari games. Not like the late 90s where people started to reminisce about that more. But still, imagine if it did come out on the Jaguar though, but as an incentive to make it a really special game, imagine if it included 70 games on it. Not 10, not 15, but 70 titles. How cool would that have been? And for a 64-bit Atari Jaguar, you really could have included, I think it could have handled putting 50 or 70 games on it. And they could have been titles from the 2600, the 5200, the 7800, and the Atari Lynx. Why not? Right? I mean, this would have been an incentive to buy this because it had 70 games on it. And it would have helped people be reintroduced to the old, 2600 games. But you could have included all this. Nah, it just would have been so special. It would have been awesome, right? And again, for a title like this, if they were worried people weren't going to spend $60 on it, you could have charged people $30 for this title. And this really wouldn't have been extremely difficult to make, right? These are all games that are already made. And this is future technology, right? The mid-90s system. Who knows? Maybe you couldn't include 70 games? I mean, I never programmed for the Jag, so I wouldn't know. Let me know in the comments if that would have been possible. But hell, you really still could have definitely included 30 or 40 games. No doubt. Alright, so here's the next idea. This is the sequel to Hover Strike. I love the original Hover Strike, by the way. No one else does, except for me and a few other people. But this game was a Atari Jaguar CD game. But this is my concept of, imagine if it was released on a cartridge. If the Jaguar CD wasn't released. The Atari Jaguar 2 my concept idea for '96, that could have been the Jaguar CD. That could have been the first time they had a CD Jaguar console. But I think for these kind of games, there's like 3 titles that were the best titles for the Jaguar CD that I think, for me, if I'm rewriting history here, like I am, I think it would have been better if this was released on cartridge. Yes, it wouldn't have been as graphically impressive as the CD version, of course, but even still, I still think it would have been possible to actually release it on the cartridge, though. It still would have been basically the same for the most part. And plus, it would have helped the life of the new franchises they were trying to create on the Jaguar, like Iron Soldier, Tempest 2000, Hover Strike, these new ideas that they were coming up with during the Jag era, these new IPs. So this is my custom-made art, removing the Jaguar CD logo at the bottom. And this is what it would have looked like if it would have came out on the cartridge. Alright, here's my next idea. Pong, The Next Level. This is a PS1 title, once again. I think it was released in 1999 or something like that, or 98. And it's interesting, isn't it? Why couldn't have this been released on the Jaguar? Just imagine. It would have helped people think about Pong again a little bit. And I know this is not a great game, but it's kind of neat, right? It's kind of cool. So again, like I said with the other PS1 Atari titles, this was released in the late 90s, but they could have easily released this and made this in 1994 and 1995. So why not? You know? Okay, Iron Soldier 3. So, Iron Soldier 3 did get a release. It was actually on the PS1, believe it or not. Never got to play it, but I'm assuming it's probably better than the first 2 games. But imagine if history was rewritten, and Iron Soldier 3 could have came out in 1995 on the Atari Jaguar itself. You know, if they did all my ideas and it would have been more successful and all that stuff. So this is my custom-made box art for Iron Soldier 3 on the Jag. Would have been super cool. But, oh well. Highlander, the last of the whatever, I can't pronounce that. This was a Atari Jaguar CD game. So, just like I said with Hover Strike, Conquered Lands or whatever, I think this should have been released on cartridge. Once again, it wouldn't have been as good looking, but still, I think this title could have still worked and functioned on the Jaguar. And if they made it easier to program, it could have been done with ease, of course. So this is my custom-made art, once again. Really cool title. One of the best games on the Jaguar CD. Same thing here, Battle Morph. Battle Morph really, I think, would have worked better as a title for the original Atari Jaguar, not the Jaguar CD. And imagine if it came out in 1994. Yes, a year after Cybermorph, because Battle Morph is everything that Cybermorph was supposed to be. Battle Morph is a really great game, and it's way better than Cybermorph, even though the title's not as good. Battle Morph is a great cover, great game, maybe one of the best games on the Jaguar CD, definitely for sure. But again, even though it would have had a little bit of a struggle, this still could have gotten released on the original Jaguar hardware. And if it came out in 1994, it could have redeemed the original title of Cybermorph, maybe. Would have made people think a little bit differently. So yeah, this is my custom art if it was for the original Jag. Next title, Asteroids 2000. So once again, going with the other stuff I mentioned, Asteroids was released on the PS1 in 1999. And I think it was an Atari title. It was basically, again, another 3D remake of a classic arcade game, where they were trying to get people back into the old arcade games. It was a really charming time to experience that stuff. I thought it was fun. It was cheesy. It was fun. And even though no one gave a shit about asteroids during the late 90s, it was neat, actually. They were trying to bring it back and get people nostalgic, and it was a fun time. It was a cheesy, fun time. But anyway, imagine if it got a Jaguar release. And I changed the title to not just plain old Asteroids, but Asteroids 2000. Why not? This would have been a perfect Jaguar title. And even though this really is not a great game for the PS1, it's okay. You could have made it a little bit better, right? And then released it on the Jag. It would have made people remember and be nostalgic about the old Atari games. Okay, next we have Star Wars, the arcade game for the Atari Jaguar. Imagine if this was released back in the mid-1990s, if this was a 1994 release, or even a 1993 release. So you can actually buy this online. It's extremely expensive, and I might get it, actually. But someone actually did put this on a real cartridge, and this is the actual box art that they made. Really freaking cool, right? And it's just the 1980s Atari, well, not Atari, it's the 1980s Star Wars arcade game, where you blow up the Death Star, and it has the vector graphics that you saw on the Vectrex back in the 80s. And even though it was older technology, and this is a 64-bit system, still, the novelty of being able to play something like this at home, and for a rare arcade game that not everyone got to play, it would have been pretty cool if it did get released on the Jaguar. Like, the old 80s fans would have really loved to buy this. This would have been a cool incentive to own a Jaguar and buy this. And again, since it's just the old 80s arcade game, they could have charged people like 30 or 40 bucks for this title, and it would have sold fairly well. Plus, this is the only console that this could have came out for. I mean, maybe the Super Nintendo and the Genesis could have done these kind of graphics a little bit, but it definitely was much smoother and better looking on the Jag, right? So, even though you can buy this, it's extremely rare, and someone else made this box art. I'm mentioning it here because my idea is that imagine if this was released in 1994 or 1993, and that would have been perfect. I really wish they would have came up with these ideas back then. It's about 30 years too late, but, you know, that's life. So also, next we have The Empire Strikes Back, the arcade game. Imagine if this was released on the Jaguar once again. This is also artwork made by a fan, and just like the first Star Wars arcade game, you can actually buy this for the Jaguar. It's even more rare, but it's just that old arcade, the 80s arcade game. Empire Strikes Back, Star Wars, the vector graphics. Again, imagine this was released back in 1994, and you could have had the Star Wars arcade game released in 93, and then Empire could have been released in 94, and that could have been an incentive for people to buy it. Oh man, that could have been amazing, right? But also, my idea actually would have been to have put Star Wars, the 80s arcade game, and the Empire Strikes Back 80s arcade game on one cartridge, on one cart. If it would have been possible, that would have been amazing and way better of a purchase for fans, I think. For Star Wars fans and for Jaguar fans. If you could have fit both those 80s arcade games on one cartridge, and then call the title Star Wars and Empire Strikes Back arcade game, right? Put them both on one cart, and that would have really sold. But again, since it's an old 80s arcade game, you could have charged 30 bucks for it. And this is my idea. You can't buy this. But I thought, why not complete the trilogy? Imagine if they released the Return of the Jedi arcade game from the 80s on the Atari Jaguar, back in like 94 or whatever. And even though the graphics are, I would say 16-bit, they could have looked pretty impressive for a 64-bit console. And the Sega Genesis and Super Nintendo didn't have this released. So this could have been an exclusive Jaguar title, and it would have fit the roundup of including the whole trilogy of the Star Wars arcade games on the Jaguar. It would have made the Jaguar seem like it was the special, unique system for all the cool fans of pop culture, and it would have helped the Jaguar stand out. This is my custom-made box art. I love this old 80s poster of Return of the Jedi, and Return of the Jedi is my favorite Star Wars film. I love that face of Luke he makes where he looks like he's terrified, and the explosion, and yeah, this would have been cool, right? Well, that's all I got. These are my ideas. These are my custom-made box arts. It's just a fun video of what could have been, and I really think my ideas would have helped the Jaguar succeed, and it still could have sold more and lasted longer. And maybe I'll come up with more box art and video game ideas for the Jaguar, and I'll do a part 2 if you guys like the video. So please like and subscribe. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below, and the Jaguar will live on forever. My name is SuperPat98, and thanks for watching, everybody.